A young man bravely sets out alone on what turns into a significant journey to explore the beauty and wonders of nature and the world. Throughout his travels, which ultimately lead him into the wild and wilderness, he seeks and ultimately finds pleasure and happiness, along with a sense of truth and purpose he has been yearning for all his life. And throughout the way, he meets and deeply touches a cast of others who are all in their own way also looking to run away or move on from the past and enjoy life again.
Before we start, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Christopher Johnson McCandless was born on February 12, 1968 in El Segundo, California. His parents are Walter McCandless and Wilhelma Johnson. Chris also had one younger sister, Karen. In 1976, the family settled in Annandale, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C., after his father was employed as an antenna specialist for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration (NASA). His mother worked as a secretary at an aircraft company and later assisted her husband with his successful home-based consulting company. Walt also had children from his first marriage and was living in California. Although Walt was still legally married to his first wife when Chris and Karen were born. As a student, Chris advanced with average grades. He was characterized by intense idealism and physical endurance, leading a team of cross-country runners. McCandless eventually graduated from Emory University in 1990 with a bachelor degree, majoring in both history and anthropology, but saw titles and honors as immaterial and irrelevant. Later, he would say that university in the 20th century is not something to aspire to. By the end of summer in 1990, he donated all the money he had in his trust fund to charity and made his way driving his Dustin through Arizona, California, and South Dakota, where a flash flood wet his engine and broke his car down. The next morning, he left his car behind and got rid of all his belongings. He buried the license plates and cut up his ID card, bank card, and burned the money he had in his wallet. Furthermore, he decided to start going by the name Alex Supertramp. Alex traveled through various states of America, passing mostly by the countryside, using trains, hitchhiking, canoeing, and of course walking. He met a lot of people with whom he built great relationships and inspired. During his journey, he worked part-time jobs from time to time so that he can afford the necessary supplies for traveling and camping. McCandless traveled widely in the western United States as a self-styled tramp. He used to ride freight trains, but mostly hitchhiked to reach his destination. In the autumn of 1990, he became friends with Wayne Westerberg, the operator of grain elevator in Carthage, South Dakota. After working for Westerberg for a while, Chris decided it was time to move on with his journey. He headed south and launched on an aluminum canoe paddling from the Colorado River all the way to Mexico. After re-entering the United States, he spent much of the year after it working in McDonald's restaurants in Bullhead City, Arizona. He lived in Salton City for some time and then reappeared in Carthage, where he planned out for his ultimate destination, Alaska. McCandless described what he was seeking in his journey as ultimate freedom. For Chris, it meant freedom from people's rules and authority over him, to live completely in a world where the only rules he feels the need to follow are those of nature. This is to him ultimate freedom. Yet, this level of freedom requires total solitude and isolation from people, for to be with others means to have obligations for them. Chris dreamt of an Alaskan adventure. He would tell this to those he met along the road. Some people that he worked for or just met, such as Jane and friends and Wayne, would try to convince him to stay or change his direction, and some would insist on giving him supplies to help with his journey. He reached his final destination on April 28, 1992 in Fairbanks, Alaska, the Stampede Trail. After crossing the Teklanica River with minimal supplies, Alex arrived on an abandoned bus that was used as a shelter by moose hunters before. He began to live off the land. He had 4 kilograms of rice, a Remington semi-automatic rifle with 400 rounds, several books including one on local plants life, and some campaign equipment. Chris poached porcupines and squirrels and birds. He also lived by gathering roots and berries. He even managed to kill a moose, but however, failed to preserve the meat properly. In July, and after he lived in the Alaskan wilderness for 3 months, he decided to go back to society, but found the trail blocked by the Teklanica River, which was then considerably higher and swifter than when he crossed it in April. For the first time, he felt as if he was trapped there. He went back to the bus scared and lonely, leaving an SOS sign, but pointlessly, he struggled to survive, and ended up eating a poisoned potato seed that weakened his body and led him to starve slowly to death. His body was found 3 weeks later by some hunters and weighed about 30 kilograms, and later on, the bus where he died became an iconic attraction to travelers and adventurers and tramps from all around the world. In the story of Chris, it's really essential to analyze the life of Chris before he embarks on his adventure and after he does. It's crucial to see the childhood environment in which he grew at, and also the tendencies he had and the characters who influenced him. Not only that, but also the topics that he highly regarded and were sensitive to him. In brief, it's necessary to understand Chris before judging him. Karen, who was the dearest and closest person to Chris, has given many talks, especially to high school and college audiences, in which she has talked about the childhood abuse and the effect it had on her and her brother. She even wrote a book about it, The Wild Truth, a memoir of both her brother's life and her own, where she laid out her recollection of their early age and their family environment, elaborating the impact it had on their lives and how it drove Chris to cut off all ties with his parents. Karen wrote on the cover of the book, "I wanted to explain that going into the wild was far from crazy. It was the sanest thing he could have done." In a summer trip to Southern California in 1986, Chris discovered about his father's affair. He discovered that his father was not yet divorced from his first wife when he and Karen were born, and somehow managed to live between the two families without revealing to his kids about it. This infuriates Chris to the point where he believed that his life had all been a lie, and led to the formation of emotional wounds, which will play a role in empowering Chris' desire for solitude and social detachment. Besides the childhood issues and traumas which heavily impacted Chris's life, McCandless was strongly influenced by writers such as Henry David Thoreau, Leo Tolstoy, and Jack London, who also choose to live in nature or the countryside, and wrote masterpieces in the naturalism and realism fields of study, criticizing the human state within society and discussing the impacts of politics and religion and social norms on the shaping of our psychology. Even though Chris didn't live long, he lived enough to see the injustice in the world, which bothered him very deeply. In fact, since his college days, he was concerned and aware of the corruption of governments, the issues of social justice, and the way capitalism oppressed the poor. In his final grades in college, he got an A in Apartheid and South African Society and History of Anthropological Thought, and an A in Contemporary African Politics and the Food Crisis in Africa. After knowing this much about Chris's personal life, it's easier to understand his motives and the reasons that drove him to choose the wilderness. He saw wilderness as associated with a sort of moral and spiritual purity, a place where he can test himself outside of the world of capitalist privilege, and identified life in nature as superior to civilized life, in which one was a part of a vast cycle of injustice and oppression. Chris wanted to discover his true self by discovering his real nature in the most original human environment, which for him could be done only by cutting ties with things that distract us and distort our human nature. Dependent on himself and on the gear he brought with him, he went away from the government's brain and hypocrisy of society in nature. His adventurous spirit was unleashed, freed from what he saw as irrational social norms. You are wrong if you think joy emanates only or principally from human relationships. God has placed it all around us. It is in everything and anything we might experience. We just have to have the courage to turn against our habitual lifestyle and engage in unconventional living. My point is that you don't need me or anyone else around to bring this new kind of light in your life. It is simply waiting out there for you to grasp it, and all you have to do is reach for it. The only person you are fighting is yourself and your stubbornness to engage in new circumstances.
Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more videos of crime and mysteries and much more interesting stories. I see you in the next video. Take care.